Role-playing groups have had this argument before. Why are we still doing this at a table? We've had it enough times that we built a company around it. We are QuestXR, and this started as the most obvious idea imaginable. Adam wanted to build a real-life national treasure. I wanted to take D&D outside. And somehow we managed to turn this into a company. Now, Adam, what's the one-sentence version of how all of this started? One sentence.
I've been inspired a long time ago by the book Dream Park. A variety of different things converged toward the end of COVID, or the end of the lockdown, that inspired me to take this into a real world.
Welcome to the Quest Log with Adam Lesh and Zachary Hunchar. This is the first in a series where Adam and I talk through the real decisions behind QuestXR. We're talking about how all of this actually started today. Now, with me, Adam Lesh, our co-creator, also our CEO and CTO. Adam actually started QuestXR. His angle coming in was to create a real-world experience closer to something like National Treasure, but for things like museums, like physical spaces you move through and uncover a layered story in, rather than simply just reading placards. Adam, why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, so I've been a gamer. I started playing when I was in ninth grade, about a year ago, and I've been to Gen Con. I've run games at Gen Con, so I've had a long experience and love of tabletop role-playing games. Fast forward a lot of years, I've been in technology in a variety of different areas and places, including the entertainment industry. And we were coming out of COVID, and I noticed some stories about how museums were struggling to re-attract visitors again. Their attendance was down. This was quite a few years ago. Things are better now, but it was part of the inspiration. Also, having just recently watched National Treasure and thinking about things like escape rooms, I thought what would be an interesting draw into museums, historical sites, would be the having a game to play, like an escape room that you could play on site, and with stories that were built around the content of those places. So that was my original idea. It didn't really have anything to do, believe it or not, with tabletop role-playing games, but it was, part of that was must have been percolating in the background. Because one of the next things I did after having this concept and percolating a little bit on it was I called Zach and started chatting with him about it. And that's when things started to go in a different direction, but in a really interesting one. So Zach, I think you can pick up the story from here and tell us about your background and then sort of what you thought about when I brought the concept to you.
Right, so my background is similar to Adam's, a lot of gaming. I think I first started playing when I was in third or fourth grade. There's a slight age difference between the two of us. I moved to Los Angeles from the East Coast to go into entertainment. Been at a bunch of movie studios over the years. That was actually how we met in the early days of DVD. Became friends and then stayed friends long after DVD was gone, although I guess technically it is coming back in a weird way. A lot of film distribution, and then when the pandemic hit, I stopped working in the entertainment industry. Not really by choice, but I was doing a lot of film distribution, and no one was going to movie theaters during that time. But what was fun was that I got pulled back into the world of role-playing games. Old friends, new friends. It reminded me of all the things that I love about role-playing games: stories, diversions, community. So Adam brought this idea to me, and it's like, oh, that sounds kind of cool, but I don't know how we go into a museum right now, which was fine. The technology wasn't really quite ready for us. We were more ready than it was. And from there, we put the company together, and we're pushing forward as fast as we can. Before QuestXR, what were things that you were looking for that didn't exist yet? I know you talked about National Treasure, and I know you talked about escape rooms, but was there something more there that you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it for a while, but again, a book that really inspired me and that made me want something to change was Dream Park
Mm-hmm.
by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, I think, right? Pournelle? the minute I read that book, I couldn't put it down. I'm an avid reader anyway, and have continued to be an avid reader. And it was the first thought I had about how something like Dungeons and Dragons could actually be played in the real world. And of course, this was the technology of the time where they did it. If you haven't read it, it takes place basically in a giant warehouse. There are technology all around that's recording the various people who are playing characters, and there's all kinds of little stuff that they put in that, like you have a special staff as a magician which is electronic and communicates with the computers around it to create the effects. So of course that was something that would be cost ineffective. But sort of what happened not long after, or maybe a few years later, was things like escape rooms started happening, and that's kind of have a similarity. Now there's no role playing, but there is the idea of a sort of a live action adventure where you're solving problems and trying to get through to a final ending. And so again, I always thought it would be really interesting to merge those two technologies. And even in some of the escape rooms, they have like VR headsets that you put on at some point, and then there's a part of it's part of the experience. But I always felt like it being confined to a little room was kind of weak, and we could do something better, especially as technology like augmented reality began to emerge and become more effective and cost effective and doable for an average person. So anyway, so that's sort of my backstory and where these things begin to coalesce. So, uh, so Zach, so what made you a TTRPG enthusiast?
Well, I think a fair amount of it was kind of ties in a little bit to what you were describing about escape rooms. I know that they're sort of confined, but the interacting is one of the things that really resonated with me concerning role playing games, whether it be in person or using a virtual tabletop. I love the social interaction, and I love being able to get outside of my brain. Uh, Maybe if I applied myself differently, I would have been an actor, but I love being someone else and finding like-minded individuals that like to do that as well. Like, obviously, the role-playing game universe has broadened considerably in the past decade compared to where it was, say, when you and I started. Because back then it was just mostly guys, and it was kind of not the cool guys, it was those other guys. So, we found our tribe, we found our people, and I loved it. I would go and say Dungeons and Dragons is probably the one that is the most omnipresent, but I don't think it was the one that really moved me. There was a system by a company called Palladium that was very popular in the 80s and early 90s. They're best known for the Rift system, but where I connected with it were things like Robotech and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Those are things that I loved at the time. And that system, the interconnectedness of it, was just like magical to me. I loved making the characters and playing it with my friends. And
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the guys versus girls things. I got really lucky. When I started playing, there were a couple of girls who played with us when we were in ninth
wow,
grade. And I
wow,
never not had girls as part of it, going to Gen Con in both, by the way, again, to date myself, in Lake Geneva, at least once before moving to Milwaukee. Um, there were women. Now the ratio was terrible, but there were women there, and it was always kind of a fun part of it when you would actually have a mixed group, right? I made it to me. It made it so much more fun. Really enjoyed that aspect of it. And then you mentioned D&D versus other systems.
right,
When I was the last couple of games I ran at Gen Con were actually GURPS systems.
right,
And even then, I was inspired by movies because I really liked how GURPS could create a cinematic experience, but the
hmm,
cinematic rules weren't available at the time. So, for
right,
example, one of the games I played was actually Die Hard. I literally recreated Die Hard, levels of the building, made maps. The players played the bad guys, and I played as the GM. I played John McClane, and he would just pop up and spray the room with bullets and then run away. Um, Now, in the original GURP system, that would wipe them out in a matter of minutes. So I actually created for myself the cinematic rule where basically nothing ever hit anything, and it was rare for someone to get hurt.
right.
And so even back then, when I was just a teenager, I was really inspired by that mix of movies cinematic, role playing, and systems again that could support different genres.
So we came together and we began having sort of regular meetings. Um, can you remember a point or a time during that process where everything sort of like clicked, where it all came together and it made sense? Maybe it wasn't technically ready, but the idea was like, that's the thing right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an evolution, right? I mean, we started. I mean, I built this thing in technically a few times, and one of the early ones was actually building it as kind of like a private eye style adventure, and which did not at the time include any skills or any role playing system. There was role playing because you played the role of the PI. There was problem solving. There wasn't even any combat at the time because I wasn't even sure how to implement something like that, given the technology that I had, the tools that I had available, and my coding skills. And so as you and I kept iterating on how we could turn this into something better and how we could bring it closer into the tabletop role playing game experience, I think when I brought up GURPS because that was what I was familiar with. And but we looked into it, and it can't be licensed. So we didn't want to go into anything where we would have to go through some licensing process.
Right.
Dungeons and Dragons, even though they have the open license, had just around that time made massive changes, which made the industry, or I should say the community, very, very angry.
Right.
And so I think you're the one who brought up Cassian, right? You're the one who brought up BRP.
Yeah, I think it was because of Cthulhu, the Call of Cthulhu games that I really like. It was because they had an open system. It was just open license.
Right. And so that's what, when we looked into it, that's what clicked. I think that's when we finally found a system that we could implement. And it really got my juices flowing in terms of how would I implement this thing. And I actually did build it into the original iteration, or well, maybe the second iteration technically, that included some skills and some things along those lines that we could use, but it was a fixed character. Well, we called the character Mickey Lewis, who was the PI story,
Hmm.
and they didn't, we didn't give players any options. And so that's when we started, and when we moved on into other ways and kept iterating through, and we started incorporating more Chaosium BRP into it. I think that's when things really started flowing and started moving in a direction that led us to where we are today.
And just a quick note for anyone that's still watching. Thank you for watching, by the way. Uh, the idea of incorporating other systems into this game is something that we'll probably touch upon in future videos, but our desire is to make this as broad as possible. So, I think when we're a little more, we have a bigger subscriber base, we have more people playing it, and we might find a way to make it a little more permanent relationship with Dungeons and Dragons. And we know it's the biggest system out there, and lots of you are playing it, but we don't want to go down that road and then have it yanked out from underneath us like a lot of other people almost
Yeah, I think we
experience.
would have to have it. I mean, the idea is hopefully if we, establish enough of a reputation and become something that people are playing a lot of, then they'll be more inclined to talk to us and actually sign a real contract that would protect both parties um, throughout the process, and we wouldn't have to go through. It's an enormous effort to turn these game systems into something that can be automated, and so we don't want to go down that road. But there's other ones too, like GURPS and even back into Palladium, things along those lines. I've even seen some new ones that we would be love to talk to and think about how we would incorporate them and allow characters even potentially to move back and forth amongst the systems rather than just be stuck in one.
So we've been chipping away at this for a while, a couple of years then. What actually changed within the past few years that has really accelerated this process for us?
So I think two. One is actually technology for augmented reality has evolved to the point where it's now a lot more cost effective, a lot easier to do, and less gated. So there have been a few tools we use as we've been building this thing that allow us to sort of experiment, do things in AR space that is important to this whole thing. Because I think one of the things we didn't mention it, but one of our sort of log lines is this is like Pokemon Go meets Dungeons and Dragons, and so the AR aspect of it is important, although not all consuming. There's a lot of it that isn't AR. I think that might be too tiresome. But then obviously the big one was AI assisted coding. So as much as I've been a coder my whole life, I've coded in a lot of different languages, but something to this extent was not really within my capabilities. So I started experimenting with the major models and how they can assist with coding, not content building, but at that point, but just actually coding something that's built for the web or even for mobile about almost 2 years ago, and that allowed me to really accelerate this. So I could really build it. Well, now I could build what I want. I could do it with prompts. When things weren't working, I could dig into the code myself and make tweaks, but I didn't have to sort of try to build this thing from scratch because it is a pretty monstrous effort. And has really accelerated the entire process to the point where we actually have a working app that you can create characters in the BRP system and play quests that are out there, including an entire sort of interface that allows you to manage your characters, manage your quests, and play them at the same time, which has been a lot of fun to build.
Just for those of you that are still with us, thank you for sticking around. The topic of AI we're going to come back to probably in its own separate conversation because we know that it's very polarizing and we have thoughts on the matter, and we're trying to do this BackerKit, and we know not everybody's comfortable with it, and we want to talk about why we're using it right now and what our goals are in the future. That being said, I think, Adam, it might be helpful to describe the size of our team and what they do.
Sure, you and me. That's it. That's the whole team. And that's true, right? So to dig just briefly into the AI thing, I think um, feel free to jump in, Zach. But our position is we're agnostic. This whole system is being built for GMs as well as players.
Mhm.
And so that's going to include content creation. It's going to include quest creation. We call them quests, modules, adventures. And all of that, as far as we're concerned, we're certainly not going to ban AI created content from here because we know, just like with us, people are bootstrapping their content creation. They're paying for it themselves. They don't have the money to have people do AR creation with professionals because that's extremely expensive, among other things. And so our take is that we're pretty agnostic about how AI is utilized. From our perspective, we're using it for coding, as I mentioned, and we do use it for some image generation, especially for our social media content. That's up to us. We do, as our BackerKit, have a pledge that we will for our printed material, because we intend to not only have the virtual quests but also print them out for people to play on their tabletop if they want to. Any art for that will be human created, not generated by AI, if we hit our stretch goal. So we've budgeted this thing out. We know what it's going to cost us to get across the finish line, or at least get to the point where we have a working app, what would they say, a version 1 of the app. And if we hit that stretch goal, we know we can afford to pay humans to do the art.
Right.
And we're excited to do that. I mean, I follow a number of people across social media who are tremendous artists. We'd love to work with them. And so that's how we expect to get there.
Okay. And do you see a time in the future where you think, we'll have to start hiring human bodies as well to help with the coding, even if we are working with AI as well? It's just from a timing standpoint. You can't do everything.
Yeah, most likely we'll expand the team. Again, that's sort of the budgeting process, right? So that's how we've figured out how much we're asking for on the crowdfunding, and also what our goal and stretch goals are is based around how we think we could get this thing done in roughly a year, with our goal being to sort of do a hard launch at maybe Gen Con in next year, 2027, and possibly some soft launches in advance, while we, by the way, continue to deliver the playtesting version of this thing throughout the process. So we're not going to stop. You can play it now, and we will continue to add things as we go. But bottom line is, yes, we will most likely be hiring people as well as expanding the team, as well as not just for coding but for content creation. That's really key for us, right? We know that you can't just go out there with one or two modules that people can play. We need to have a lot of stuff out there, especially since some of it is location based.
Right.
And we need to bring in some humans to get that stuff done. Because so far we haven't at all, by the way, used AI to create any of the quests. That's all been human generated by Zach and myself. So we're not using it for that purpose, and I don't see a particularly easy way to do that right now anyway. So I'd rather have humans come on board and do that.
I'll just weigh in on my thought as well, which is the briefly is that I'm a storyteller. We're both storytellers. We both have published books. Deep down, I don't want an AI to tell my story for me. I want to tell the story. I want people to connect with me, but we need help creating the conduit, and that's where I think we tread the line or thread the needle, if you will. Um, the campaign is on BackerKit already. We're using BackerKit. We'll delve into that more on another recording. Um, another point. This is just sort of like a human question, but Adam, do you think there was a point where you thought this wasn't going to work? And it is more of like a dirt thing, but what are things that maybe we didn't just necessarily agree upon all the time, or was there friction, or the stylistically different approaches to things?
I think the from a not work perspective, the only thing that ever concerned me was fundraising. We've tried to talk to some angels and some VCs, and they weren't buying into the concept. It's a difficult one to sort of talk about because
Sure.
it's pretty big. It's not very focused on one very simple thing.
Yeah.
It's big. It includes GMs. It includes a back end interface. It includes how the players work and different role playing game systems. And so it's complicated. It was tough to sort of talk about that to people like that, which is why we ended up deciding to go crowdfunding. Um, so nothing in the concept or in our teamwork caused that problem. I think any friction between us was kind of on me in a degree, right? Because I'm the technical person trying to make this thing work, especially on the shoestring and especially given the limited resources and what we had to work with. And you would come up with these fantastic ideas, and I mean that in every sense of the word fantasy, and challenge me. And sometimes my knee jerk reaction was, I don't know. I'll see what I can think about. And so then I would spend a day or two working it out, sometimes by myself, with just research, sometimes again, chatting with one of the AIs, and come up with a solution. I think of myself as a strong problem solver and troubleshooter. And so that's been the fun part, right? It's if I think I was trying to do this by myself, it wouldn't have ended up quite as strong a concept had I not brought in Zach. Which really was, by the way, my intent was knowing Zach's creativity. And while, yes, we're both creative, Zach is much more dedicated to creativity than I am. And I knew that would be where the challenges would come. And I hope I've always maintained an open mind on all of this stuff. I don't think I've ever shut anything down. But I definitely had those moments where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to make that work. And then figured it out. So that's been always the really fun part and sometimes the challenging part in really a good way.
It reminds me of when we were originally working together in the 90s and 2000s, which is I was a studio guy and we're functionally useless. One day maybe I'll delve into why movie studio executives are idiots. And I was just as a perfect example of it. And I would come to Adam and go, "Hey, I want to do this thing," and be like, that's not how it works." But then you would look into it and find it, and that's how things evolved. It's like if I come to him and pitch an idea and it may not be feasible yet. That's the key. So it's been fun.
I also remember a couple times like we had some so I was running a small post production facility that mostly made DVD masters, and that's how Zach and I got connected. And it was we did all the creative as well, all the menus and stuff like that. And there were a couple times when I had a very big idea, but it would cost a little more money. And then I would have to go to Zach and say, I want to do something really cool that we haven't done before. One was we did a thing where there was a lot of movie centered around a kitchen, and we did this thing where we had the refrigerator open and close to make
Right. Yeah.
transitions between menu pages. But it was all 3D. It was really much more not as flat as we had done before, and I had to hire a special guy to do it. And so it was really fun to come to him and say, "I have this cool idea. Let me pitch it to you." And he would say, "Let me see if I can get the money." And then we would come back and he would go, "Okay, I got you this much money." And I said, "I'll make it happen," because I really wanted to. When I wanted to do it, I was willing to actually eat a little bit of cost just to get a cool creative thing done. It was a good interaction. We always worked really well together.
In those early days, I was working for this company called Trimark, which was eventually consumed by Lionsgate. But Trimark had never had any money. Like they had never had any money to spend, so it was always a struggle. But we had a lot of fun in the process.
We got it. We got some cool stuff done, man.
Yeah, and I think this is the next step in that. Is a really cool project. In the end, this QuestXR exists because we work well together. We have a good idea, and we tried to answer that question. Why do we have to do things the way they've always been done, just one way? And I think that works because we work like that. Um, Thank you. We'll be back in a week or so with another episode. Remember to follow us on BackerKit. There'll be a link in the description. If you want to see where all of this started in 60 seconds instead of, well, I think we're at about 27 minutes at this point, you can follow us on TikTok and Instagram, which will also be in the links. And there'll be shorter, little tighter clips of specific sections. Thank you for joining us. Once again, I'm Zachary Hunchar, Adam Lesh.
You can, like I said, you can play the game. It's at QXRgame.com. Shows links everywhere, including on our BackerKit pages, on our main website, which again there are links to on our BackerKit pages. So yeah, feel free to jump in, play, break it. We're excited to get your feedback and learn where we can fix things and make things better. So we're really open to that. We want the community to help us build this thing, and so please come on board and check it out for us too.
Once again, this was the Quest Log with Adam Lesh and Zachary Hunchar. Thank you for watching.